Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
Welcome to the open door. I have left an open door before you, which no one can close. Open to the love of God, open to joining His stream of love for others. And we have with us today Dr. Rhonda Chervin, Professor of Philosophy at Holy Apostles College and Seminary in Connecticut, dedicated widow, author of numerous books about Catholic living. We have Dr. James Hannick from Los Angeles, philosophy professor, father of 5 children, pro-life activist, editor at New Oxford Review. And Commander Al Hughes in Corpus Christi, Texas, our leader, colonel in the Air Force, a married father who converted to the church from atheism and also has degrees in engineering and in pastoral studies. So we're waiting for Dr. Richard Garrity from Birmingham, Alabama, and we'll see how that goes. But right now, let's go to the commander, Al Hughes. Take it away, Al.
Thanks, Bob. So this is December, and winter's approaching, which is a great metaphor for the elder years. And all of us have a choice. We have a choice. We can sink into dismal snows, or we can glide across the top on skis of hope and joy. It is an individual choice. So our skiing patrol here, our panel, will discuss over the next 3 weeks the sources of joy available to the elderly. Today it will be joy found in the avocational work, service, and social outreach. Following week, joy found in pursuit of arts, literature, and science. And the final week before Christmas will be joy found in studies, teaching at all levels, and spiritual progress. So panel, where can we find joy in avocational work, service, and social outreach?
Okay, I, Rhonda, could speak first because when I was 60 years old, I wrote a book called Seeking Christ in the Joys and Sufferings of Aging. And this book you can find on En Route Books. En Route Books is the one who promotes WCAT Radio. So if you look on your screen where it says En Route, you'll see how to spell that, ENROUTE, En Route Books and Media.com. And then if you click on that, you can get a copy of the book on Kindle cheap or just buy the regular soft cover. In any case, I wrote this when I was 60, and now I'm 80. And now, rereading the book at 80, Bob Olson, the lay evangelist who is doing the intros to all these programs, Bob and I read highlights of the book into a little audio just recently. And, of course, all these things seem very different when you're 80 than when you're 60. In any case, I have a whole chapter on the joys of aging, and some of them I'm just coming into now because just 2 days ago I officially retired as a professor of philosophy, and so I am joining others on this panel who are retired. And so we'll see all the many joys I will experience. But just one that's absolutely obvious to me is that when you do volunteer things or when you have discretionary time, that you don't have this pressure. You're not squeezing everything into an agenda every day the same way as when you're working full time. So that's a great joy. And now I will pass to you other retirees.
Well, I don't know about being a retiree. Rhymes with deportee. So I've decided to call myself, and this is Jim speaking, I've decided to call myself redirected. And if you're redirected, you have to have a direction. and the direction will be somewhat different from your prior direction. And Al has asked us to focus on avocational work, service, and social outreach. Oftentimes, what one has been doing, one can continue to do. So I was teaching, and I can continue to teach. One way that I found myself teaching just lately and just dipping into is there's a new party, not party as in party on a weekend, but there's a new political party forming called Solidarity, the Solidarity Party, and that term, of course, is taken from John Paul II. And there's a active discussion, what would you call it, discussion board, and people are looking for ideas in founding a new party, and I can mention all sorts of ideas that come from philosophy. So that's a very recent way of continuing to teach, and I'm very pleased about that.
Yeah, this is Al. As another example, I have a good friend who he worked his way up from the bottom in the post office department to a very high level, national level. Was offered the opportunity to become part of the executive service and turned it down because he saw that age was coming, and his choice, because he loved the work, was to actually take a downgrade and become a postmaster at a small Texas town, which turned out to be a very joyful thing for him. The general point is that if you really love your work and the people that you're working with, it's sometimes best as you approach retirement to rather than to try to keep scrambling up the ladder, is to go sideways or down the ladder a bit and find joy in a slow down before retirement hits you. So, and that way you can continue with work that you love. Having said that, there are all kinds of avocational work outside of paid work in the service field. Myself, when I left aerospace, my avocational work was in teaching the faith and in working in doing church work, sometimes with a little bit of minimal pay and mostly without. And my great joy was in seeing the response of people who discover Christ through my own efforts.
Good direction. Best direction.
And I guess in a more general sense, I want to talk a minute about bridge. I play bridge with anywhere from 16 to 20 elderlies, most of them in their 80s, some in their 90s, and all the way to 101. They're sharp. Physically they're wiped out, but some of them are. But mentally they're all alert, and it's because of that game. I find joy in bridge in three ways. First, the game itself, which is demands mental activity that really keeps you going. And second is sharing that mental activity with others. You project your own joy into others. And third, you receive joy from others who are also engaged in the same activity. So if you're serving others in any capacity with like-minded people, you're going to both give and receive joy and live a much more active and longer life, because medical people will tell you that mental activity keeps the body going, and I would also add it also keeps the joy going.
This is Rhonda. That's very interesting. Now, I have this thing where I'm always ranting about how in my old age I don't want to be playing games. I want to be with people with fascinating intellectual and spiritual conversations, blah, blah, blah. But what I noticed, because God likes to, checkmate your wrong ideas. What I noticed was that when I play Scrabble once a week, which is the only game, because it's a word game, that I ever won any time. So when I'm playing Scrabble, that while we're playing Scrabble, people are sitting around talking in a jovial way, and many times I can make a point that's very important to me to make to someone in this relaxed atmosphere of redirected people. I'm going to take Jim Hannock seriously and call it redirected people, that I can say things which would be much too heavy if I said them in a context of a strict teaching situation. Like if I was giving a workshop and someone asked a question and I pounded them with this point that I wanted to make. I can make it in a light kind of way in the middle of the game, and it probably reaches the target better with less defensiveness on the part of the recipient.
Good strategy. In either case, this is Jim again, in either case, be good probably to keep in mind the motto of Junipero Serra, short, pithy, always forward. Again, if you're redirected, you haven't stopped. You're certainly not going backwards. You want to be going always forward. Now, I think both Al and Rhonda are pointing out that in going forward, you want to take into account what your capacity is, and that can require some adjustments. Some people, it seems, are very leery about making any adjustments. Just yesterday, that would have been December 1st, I'd be surprised if Al hasn't been following this. Not the first, but the second man on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, was evacuated, medical evacuation. From where? Not from a bridge game, or in my case, a chess game, but from Antarctica. 86 years old, he decided to join a tour group in Antarctica. Well, it didn't work out quite the way he thought it would work out, but on the one hand, you have to give him credit for always going forward, in this case, southward, but maybe you'd take a note from not recognizing perhaps the limits that you might have, and perhaps his limits aren't our limits, but we ought to recognize our limits at the same time.
Yes, in terms of joy in doing avocational things, I find it's very important to watch. I'm now 79, okay, to watch how tired I get doing certain things. So even though I may rise to the bait, someone says, oh, let's go to the movies this evening, and it happens to be some movie that I really wanted to see. Well, basically, anything after 7 p.m., I'm just so tired that I just feel it's not worth anything to do, anything at that hour. So gradually I have to restrain my greedy desire to do some particular thing when I realize, okay, it's going to be 7 o'clock at night. I like to get into bed at 8 and read in bed. And so I think there's a certain, we have a certain resistance to realize these limitations, which is the point. But then I get much more joy out of doing the things during the day that I'm doing when I'm not trying to stretch, have like 3 big activities in one day, stuff like that. I just can't do it.
Well, one thing that strikes me in this business of going forward, let's see, I'm 83 now. So a year ago, because of diabetes, I lost my left leg. So now I'm living in my mobile home, see, and I had some help adjusting, but now I'm by myself. So all my outward energy is networking. If I want to get to church on Sunday, for instance, the other day I called a cab and it brought me to the church. And then you start looking for someone to bring you back home, see? And, or you're looking for some groceries, and you need someone to bring you your groceries. So it's a sort of an outreach for me to stay where I am in my mobile home. So it's, I suppose you call it more self-centered. It's more like survival, say, reaching out to others to survive. When you're younger, you didn't have to do that. You were capable of surviving on your own. So you might call that one of the adventures of old age, going out there, networking.
Yeah, Al again. I'd like to jump back to something Rhonda said about saying something profound in a very relaxed retirement situation. This something was written about my wife about a week after she died by a third party, a friend of ours, wrote about my wife saying, and I'll read it so short, she'd say something profound almost offhandedly, and even follow with a laugh, her special laugh, to soften but not contradict the truth of what she said. She really did have her unique style. I think that's really what Rhonda was saying about the opportunity to say profound things and to teach, if you will, in the midst of something as casual as a Scrabble game. That's an opportunity that none of us should ever miss, to impart a little bit of the wisdom of age on others, not in a forced or teaching mode, but just casually in the midst of other activity. That's really the core benefit, I think, of social outreach, which is really the benefit of any avocational work and service as well. It's all the same thing. It's about social outreach and receiving the outreach of others.
I had something that came to my mind in prayer about this whole area, is that I should realize that when I'm not working, you see, this is the first time, and I counted them up, it's the first time in 50 years or more, maybe 60 years, that I haven't been busy all the time, because I combined bringing up kids, being married, taking care of my semi-disabled husband, and working full-time with every spare moment writing something, you see. So I just had almost no discretionary time ever. And just now coming off of that, which was almost a workaholist, well, it was workaholism in many ways, coming totally off of this and actually having hours where I don't have to do some particular thing, see. Then on the one hand, it's a little scary. On the other hand, what I seem to be getting in prayer is that this would allow for very precious, intimate times in friendship of talking to people without squeezing them in to the agenda, see? Like you go out to dinner with someone and you're thinking, now we've got to wrap this all up by 7 o'clock because at 7 I'm going to work on my book, see? But if I don't have all these work plans, and I'm more, so to use Jim's term, I'm being redirected to treasure those beautiful moments where, for instance, you just meet someone's eyes and they can see that you empathize with the sufferings they're going through. You know, that's just as precious as writing an article, but we don't think of it as important because we're so used to evaluating each day in terms of how much did I get done instead of how much love did I show and receive. So it may seem sort of soft and sentimental, but I think it's a very real thing, especially if many of our friends are also redirected elderly. People need that love and encouragement very deeply. It's not just a luxury.
Yeah, I think that Al, the comment about empathy, showing empathy and receiving empathy, is really at the core of what we're getting at when we talk about social outreach. Two examples from the bridge game. Two of the ladies that in their 80s they come by wheelchair, and they're suffering all the time, but they're always there and they're always playing. And they occasionally, on particularly bad days, may share the fact that they're constantly in pain or whatever the problem is. And you share that empathy with them, it helps them. And the very act of empathizing with someone else has an internal effect on yourself as well, leading in the midst of perhaps pain and suffering, leading to hope and joy at the same time, no matter how old you get.
There's Jim here. There's a interesting contrast, more than interesting, a vital contrast between, I'm thinking of some reading I did to prepare for our discussion today, between what Pope John Paul II had to say in his letter to the elderly, marvelous, marvelous letter, and what Cicero says in his De Senectute, his short piece, short for him, on old age. When you read Cicero, it's always forward, but always forward, what can I do and how can I do it? And it's very wise, but it doesn't have anything of the contemplative dimension, anything of the receptive dimension. Whereas if you read John Paul II, he has lots to say about what you can do actively, but it's always woven together with the contemplative and the receptive. And I think it's because Cicero just didn't have any idea of a loving God and being in a relation with that loving God. There was a kind of stern, stoical sense of duty, and a lot of people today would do well if they had a sense of duty, but there's no sense of the contemplative or the mysterious. Whereas with John Paul II, there's certainly the directed activity, and I'm very glad to see that he speaks directly about the struggle to avoid euthanasia and the pressure on the elderly to be euthanized, and the extension of that, the pressure on the sick to be euthanized. He very explicitly discusses that, and that's a struggle that really takes work and effort and focus and political sense. But at the same time, the deep sense of the contemplative. So here's the teacher again with two recommended readings.
Well, actually, I've been thinking this program itself illustrates an avocation insofar as none of the four, well, Bob Olson used to run radio stations, so radio is his work thing. But for the rest of us, none of us have ever been full-time radio personalities, and in a way, teaching on radio first for each other, and then, of course, teachers all know, many of us are teachers or have been teachers in one way or another. Speaking it out is a way of teaching it to ourselves also, we hear our own words saying this, and we realize it's also a message to ourselves whenever we attempted to slip into a kind of, now who is the poet who has that, the slough of despond? S-L-O-U-G-H of despond, D-I-S-P-O-N-D. What is that poem? It's from a poem, isn't it, or is it Shakespeare?
I'm not sure.
But you've heard it.
I have.
Well, any case, instead of slipping into the quicksand of melancholy brooding, how good it is to be speaking about these things on this radio show, listening to radio shows with marvelous speakers like the Open Door. That's much better than the Slough of Despond, right? I hope you agree.
Well, that laughter calls to mind a marvelous line from Psalm 92 that John Paul II cites. Short, wonderful line. The just will flourish like the palm tree and grow like a Lebanon cedar, still bearing fruit when they are old, still full of sap. Chesterton said there aren't many jokes in Scripture, but he thinks at the end we'll find that God is full of mirth. Well, here's a joke right here in Scripture. We're still full of sap.
This is Al. I got to give one more bridge example here of what we're talking about, I think. And that is one of my bridge partners a couple of weeks ago, Bernice by name, sitting across from the very elderly woman, was telling me at a break in the game that she was in constant pain. Those were the words, but her eyes told the reality of what she was suffering, and that is the impact of that short conversation was in the eyes, not in the words, and that worked, I hope, in both directions, because I hope I've fired back with my own eyes a little bit of empathy. I don't know, but she seemed, after that short nonverbal encounter, she seemed to relax a bit as the day went on, as the games went on.
Yeah,
so,
well,
but that's how we can, with that sap that we still have, we can help ourselves and others at the same time to realize both hope and joy in old age.
Richard, you said something about your leg. It's not your whole leg. It's below the knee that's amputated, I believe.
Right.
I don't think I've seen you since that. But, of course, you must, especially in terms of hope and joy, be meditating on the resurrected body and how it will be perfect and fleet and how you'll be able to leap about, right?
Well, in a way, yes. What happens along that line is, since I can't go to daily mass, I read up on the readings for the mass of the day. And what strikes me, really strikes me, is that amid all the confusion and trials, the psalmist is saying, hallelujah, God is one, Christ is one. It's happening now, see, we're actually winning, see. And that strikes me as sort of ironic. I mean, you want to say, if you want to call this winning, and the psalmist says, yes. Of course, we'll only get the full satisfaction when we die. And then we'll really be like a tree on the side with its roots into the river and being fresh and green and full of sap. See, but that's the next life. But we're already on the way to it in this life. And that's the tune. You have the reading, and then you have the psalmist saying, start singing, we're winning. And I find that ironic. Yeah, I said, okay, I'm winning, right. Remember that, Garrity, you're winning, even now.
Although it's a close game. It's a damn close game.
Oh, gosh. Now, Richard, I have to break in with this. One time when I was, they lay hands on you to be a Eucharistic minister and bring the Eucharist to the sick. And I said to the priest, many people receive the Eucharist. People drive up to their houses and bring the Eucharist on Sunday in most parishes. They'll do that if people ask for it. But I said, but what about the daily communicants? What about them? And he said something so sad. He said very few of them wanted, Rhonda. So I was appalled by that statement. I was going to begin a whole new ministry doing this. But I bet in a place, Richard lives right near EWTN. I bet in a place like EWTN, there are people, if you donated gas money or something, who would be very happy to bring you the Eucharist every day, especially because then they can talk to this wonderful philosopher. So look into it. I said so.
All right.
I want to switch a little bit here. We've been talking mostly in the context of social outreach. Part of today's topic has to do with service to others as an avocation. And I just want to remind folks that there are many, many, many opportunities for volunteer work. The first thing comes to mind is in hospitals. If they're in uniform, they call them candy stripers, but hospitals are full of people doing volunteer work, and in that way, and casual, it's not forced, they're not required to, they're not making any money, they're doing it out of desire to help others, and so they're kind of like the people at Scrabble that Rhonda was talking about, in a relaxed atmosphere, unpressured to do anything. There are times when you can actually have a very profound exchange of truths among people. So social service is more than just the work of service, far more than that. And most of it is you're serving people who are less fortunate than yourself, and therefore you're doing a work of God in that.
I heard a wonderful example of this. There's a friend of mine. He's a businessman who works in real estate, okay? Very busy businessman, but he's divorced. His kids are grown up. And so in his discretionary time, which is Saturday, every Saturday he volunteers in the ER room. So, ER, now I'm getting confused. The place where, emergency room in the hospital. So every Saturday he spends the whole day, and what he's there to do is wheel the patients into the different, where they're going to do a CAT scan or they're going to do this or that, or, He wheels them in and talks to them until the doctor comes in to do the thing. And this is what he said. He said they come in frightened, very upset, not knowing what's happening to them. And he's there as this empathetic, soothing presence. And the more he described the conversations he has, because sometimes they have to sit around and wait for a whole half hour before the doctor walks into the room to do the procedure. And he's there talking to them. So, this isn't small at all. This is huge. And now he's thinking he's going to take courses in emergency room, like aid courses, so that when he retires from his real estate business, he could do this full time, at a much lower rate of pay, of course. So, the avocation can become the vocation.
That's an excellent example. Excellent.
I guess that's kind of what happened to me when I first ran into Rhonda. I was, coming out of aerospace, and I wound up a writer because of Rhonda.
That'll happen to a feller.
Yeah, that's where that's become gone from an avocation to work without pay.
That sounds dangerous.
Now, Jim, and well, Richard has written a few books, and he's working on his masterpiece, which is on a popular version of the Grammar of Assent of Cardinal Newman. So he's working on this book. It's his whole life now is working on this book. But you, Jim Hannock, you surely have a book in you so that I could encourage you to write so that you can also spend all day writing and make nothing.
Watch out, Jim. Watch out, Jim. She's dangerous.
I don't think so. Moving right along.
Well, one thing that strikes me, I have time, the Grammar of Assent, to give it its full title, An Essay in Aid of a Grammar of Assent. Now, I remember reading that in college, and it fascinated me, but I realized all the examples of what convinced me. I didn't really have a strong idea of the structure. So then I've lived a good bit of my life now, and I said, well, what am I going to do? I have a lot more free time than I used to have. And I said, well, okay, I'm going to write a book and get the structure, and that's my project. I want to do it, okay? So that settles a lot of questions of whether you should or this. I want to do it. I'm going to do it. I have the time. Okay. So, but I figured, well, I do my best thinking when I'm trying to teach something, so I'll hold before me a regular audience, and they're not experts in Newman, and they don't know much philosophy, but they're interested, or at least I assume they're interested, so I'll write for them.
Oh, now wait a minute. Big ideas running through my feverish brain. First of all, okay, Jim Hannock, you mentioned this Solidarity Party. Many of us don't even know about it. This would be, you could suggest to Al, our moderator and idea person, you could suggest to him that we have a series about the platform of this party in relation to Catholic ethics and to the concept of solidarity of John Paul II. And
I think you just suggested that.
Yes,
that.
Yes. And then, you're writing this down, Al, and then Richard could have a few sessions where he throws out the basics of Newman's Grammar of Assent, and we can all discuss it with, and you, the listeners, can benefit by that panel.
As we redirect ourselves, we're going to haul them along.
Right.
All the listeners must be hauled along in our redirection.
I'm seriously writing down ideas for future programs.
So, okay, now, so Al, you running, wait a minute, Al, you running this program, which I suggested, by the way, is typical of an avocation, right? That you're doing something that you like to do, and you're doing it very well, and you're filling in a needed slot because we needed someone to run it. And then with your skills as a lieutenant, you know how to utilize the talents of other people in a good way by giving us ideas right before the program, right?
Okay. And it has become avocational, that's for sure. As you said earlier, I'm doing it. Oh, no, Richard said it. I'm doing it because I want to do it, not because the job requires it. And okay.
Well, there is again here coming into play a great theme of Catholic philosophy. Thomas mentions it repeatedly. I'm sure you've all heard it before. Grace builds on nature. You want to do something, you're equipped to do something. Well, that's precisely where grace enters your life in a special way to give you the direction to move ahead. Grace builds on nature.
But now, see, the non-pressure part of this is something small enough that we're doing that it doesn't require, for instance, getting on a plane for 5 hours and driving down to EWTN and flying down to EWTN and, being on a big show, even though that would be very gratifying to have a panel of us doing this. It would be very arduous in terms of travel and all that kind of thing, whereas here is something that it seems to me that all retirement or redirected activities should have a leisurely feeling to them instead of a pressure feeling.
Well, I can buy into that as I'm trying to read over what I write and see if it's relevant. Because a lot of times you veer off on some kind of an academic problem that may make sense among professors, but you try to keep your general reader in mind, and it's they wouldn't know what you're talking about. So you eliminate it. You just chop it out. Why? Well, because you have time then to rewrite it or put it in till the thing clicks, till it satisfies you. And that's very satisfying. At this point, sounds like you're procrastinating. Well, at this point, actually, I'm coming to the point where I've said, well, it's as good as I'm ever going to make it, and time to launch it out. But I've had the leisure to do that, and there's no deadline pressing, and I don't depend on it to make a living or to make any money. So you have that leisure. But it's sort of interesting. I find out I'm not procrastinating. Actually, I'm holding out for something that's real, and not that I'm just lazy. And that's rather satisfying to be able to hang into something and then launch it. And you figure it's about the best I can do. If I had another 10 years, it wouldn't be any better. Well, that's quite satisfying. And usually we don't have the pleasure or the opportunity for such satisfaction.
What's just flashing in my mind is the image of Benedict, the Pope, the emeritus Pope. And people people thought that was some sort of fake thing when he said, well, he had been hoping that when he was old he would retire and sit and write his books that he had in his head, and that traveling about to youth days with the Pope's schedule, 24/7 visibility, that all this was too much for him at age 85,
It's interesting because I read a passage, interview or some such with him, and he said his dream job had always been to run the Vatican Library, but he never got called to do that. So, without taking anything away from the sense of pacing and the recognition of limits and the need for leisure, which is the source of culture, according to one important thinker, there's another dimension. We might be redirected, but the challenges of the world, to use shorthand, are every bit as pressing and demanding as they've ever been. And in this letter of John Paul II, which is so good in so many ways, in Letter to the Elderly, the way that strikes me that it's especially good is its balancing of so many different dimensions. He says this, he refers to Peter. What shall we say of Peter in his old age, called to bear witness to his faith by martyrdom? Jesus had once said to him, "When you were young, you girded yourself and walked where you would. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish to go." Well, I'm sure that's a dimension of all of our lives. There is that, too. And in a roundabout way, that brings me back to the struggle against euthanasia. I think people who live in Texas, not so much perhaps as people who live in Connecticut. I spent a long time living in Texas. People who live in Texas really don't understand how sharply hostile the culture is in, say, the less than great state of California, where euthanasia has just been made legal for all practical purposes. And when you're working in the pro-life movement directed to euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, as it's so euphemistically called, here's how euphemistic it gets. If you commit suicide with California's new assisted suicide legislation, what's on your death certificate? Not that you took a lethal dose of drugs, but what's on your death certificate is what supposedly you would have died of had you not taken the lethal dose of drugs. That's how euphemistic the whole thing has become. Well, there's that in California, and just within the past couple of weeks, I think, and I'm aware of this partly because I'm Dutch in my background, euthanasia is now, for the first time in the Netherlands, been brought into play for people who say that their alcoholism is just too much for them to deal with. It's just too much. So we have euthanasia for someone suffering from, and it's terrible suffering from alcoholism. So there's this demonic momentum that we come to be aware of. It's really extraordinary.
You know, that's actually very, very heavy, and I have a little unit in my ethics classes, which I've now retired from teaching formal ethics classes, but I have a whole unit on euthanasia, and I'm never too satisfied with it in this way, that even though you can show that in terms of the common good, as soon as you have euthanasia, all the greedy relatives can find ways to bump you off to get their legacy early, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just from a natural level point of view, there are great dangers in promoting euthanasia. But on the other hand, from a natural law point of view, if you don't have, you know, there's a whole controversy within natural law ethics between those who say you have to have God at the top for it to work and others who say you can just do it by pure reason. But if you think of the person not as a body and soul composite, but just as a grain of sand with a Freudian id attached, why in the world would someone feel that their life, even when they're suffering greatly, is worth living? So, I mean, that's something we could talk about some other time or now a little, but, I mean, just be thinking of it, you know. So in that sense, I understand, coming from an atheist background as a convert, I understand easily why people would think euthanasia was the cat's meow. If you're suffering more than you're enjoying life, why do you have to keep going? And if you're too stupid to figure out how to kill yourself, why shouldn't the doctor help you? To put it very bluntly.
That makes me think of Bernice at the Bridge Club. How, you know, terribly in pain all the time, and yet she can sit across the table and laugh and joke and say sly remarks, and she has a very subtle sense of humor anyway. And all the time she's being a perfectly normal living woman, she's also in pain. And she says it's awful, but nevertheless, she's not looking for a doctor to help her out of that problem at all. She's still enjoying life itself.
But does she believe in God and the afterlife and the resurrected body, or is she an atheist?
I frankly don't know. I think my assumption is probably about right that nearly everybody there is religious. Not all Catholics. Many of them are Protestant, but I've never heard any hint of anybody saying anything that would be against faith in any way.
So that makes a huge difference. If you have eternal life as the horizon after death, then no matter how much suffering you have to endure, you have hope. But if you think there's nothing, then
call the doctor for a quickie. Yeah, I would assume that just about everybody in that room, and it's anywhere from generally 16 to 20 people, everybody has some sense of Christian faith. I don't see it any other way. But
so then so in terms of ministries, just sitting around the bridge table, if you mentioned even once in 20 games something about you're looking forward to your resurrected body, that could be a way of witnessing to hope.
That'd be a beautiful way to do it. The way I've done it is everybody in that room probably has a copy of my books. and they even read them. So
yeah. Oh, wow.
So they have, at a minimum, they have my conversion story, and they have the example of the holiness of my wife that just died last year. So
that's Bob, by the way.
That's the way I reach people.
This is Bob.
Yeah, Bob.
I have a friend who was a Christian. His wife was a cradle Catholic, but he was just a Christian. He wasn't a Catholic. His mother-in-law got real sick, and she was really sick, and a lot of pain, and a lot of, I don't know what the problem was, but he saw that for 3 years. And she never complained. She, had good spirits all the time, and yet she was suffering and she had this pain, but she never showed it. She was witnessing redemptive suffering, because what happened after she died, my friend said, "I want some of that," and he became a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
There's that witness, that redemptive suffering. It works. It's beautiful, and euthanasia takes all of that away.
Yeah, Al. We had a fellow there when I was living in California in Santa Maria who had bone cancer, which is a horrible way to go. Tremendous pain, but he refused to take pain-killing medicine the whole time he was dying. He was in utter agony, but he would also say, "I want to do my purgatory now, not later."
That was good.
And so in a sense, that is martyrdom, is it not?
That's right.
I mean, it was intentional that he suffered the pain. In other words, he accepts that whatever happens is the will of God, even if it's not very pleasant at the moment.
This is back to, I guess, what you could call a heavy point. In your various ways, you've emphasized how important, and certainly Rhonda has done this, how important for a horizon of hope the belief in God is. But the belief in God is so fundamental for so much of basic ethics. And we lose sight of that. And then when we come to be a de-Christianized society, little by little it dawns on us. For example, the idea that all people are equal or that all people have the same dignity, I think is just untenable unless you believe in God. You could say, in order to have peace in society, we'll have legal equality, because otherwise there'll always be people who are unlikely to give any support to the status quo unless we treat them equally, even though they're not really equally. We'll say that we have legal equality because that's necessary for a social contract. But that's not really any grounds for recognizing a true equality. And going back to the history of Athens, the Athenians at one point argued against the Milesians, or I think that's right, the Milesians, that, well, that would be a worry. We would have to treat you as equals if we were really concerned that you might be given to social disorder and overcome our regime. But you're weak, and we can defeat you. So we're not going to bother with any social contract. We're stronger than you are. We don't worry about you, and so, no, we don't take you to be equal. If you were equal, you'd be able to defeat us, but you can't. So whatever human dignity is taken to be something that, well, we've got to acknowledge it grudgingly for legal purposes in order to maintain some sort of civil order, whenever that's taken as merely instrumental, it's undermined. And I think the only conceptual basis for taking it as real is the belief in God. And as we lose the belief in God, as John Paul II said over and over again, we lose our belief in man. And if we lose our belief in man, then whenever man is obviously weak, well, we'll provide some form of death one way or the other. Now, that's extraordinarily heavy, but seems right. And there are certain places where you could live where you can see it unraveling pretty quickly.
Absolutely. Now, just before we close the program in about 2 minutes, I just want to refer you again, plug my book, Seeking Christ in the Joys and Sufferings of Aging by Rhonda Chervin. And you can just Google En Route Books and Media, which is the sponsor of this radio station, WCAT. So you go to En Route Books and Media and look for Seeking Christ in the Joys and Sufferings of Aging.
Thank you, Rhonda. This is Al. We are down near the end. I'd like to just remind everyone that this next week we'll be continuing the general topic of hope and joy in elderly life. Next session will be a discussion of joy and hope found in the pursuit of arts, literature, and science. That'll be the next session. And then the final before Christmas will be joy found in study, teaching, and the spiritual progress of one's person.
All right, Rhonda, I think it would be good for you to close in a prayer, seeing that you've had so much experience in this field of dealing with the elderly and ministering to the elderly with your books and so forth.
Okay, so we thank you, God the Father. You have created us, and you knew that we would age slowly, and you knew about all these problems from all eternity. So you want us, in the spite of the pains that we experience in old age of all kinds, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, all those kind of pains, you want us also to have joy in being able to give love to others by using our talents in love of neighbor. So we ask you to bless us, and I thank you for Al figuring out these programs and deciding on these programs, and for Bob for helping run the station, and for Dr. Sebastian Mahfoud, the head of WCAT Radio, who's encouraged us along the way, and for each of the participants for Dr. Richard, Dr. Jim, and for Al Hughes, Lieutenant Colonel Al Hughes. Amen.
And postscript that the sap might continue to run.
Along that line, I have just a short section here from St. Faustina, who said, "Help me, that my feet may be merciful." My feet, she said, may be merciful, so that I may hurry to assist my neighbor, overcoming my own fatigue and weariness. My true rest is in the service of my neighbor.
Amen.
Amen.
We'll see you again next week, same time, same station. Everybody have a wonderful week, and God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day. Show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day. Show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day. Show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.